Hi, this is JR, and I'm here actually with off camera my good friend Dr. Carl Freestone.
Hello.
And while this is a piece about Ron Paul opposes corruption, we're gonna just stick in a little word from our sponsors here. You may have noticed a small white object on someone's forehead. Carl, would you like to make a quick comment about what this is?
Sure, that's an ice wave patch, and it's an energy patch which has a crystal in it which is stimulating his pituitary gland as we speak,
With the specific effect of
with the specific effect of him overcoming any depression he may be suffering.
like if I'm depressed about Ron Paul's
It's basically, yeah, if he's dyslexic in any way, these patches, they take dyslexia away and they organize his nervous system in a way that works for all of us.
especially for me. All right. Well, so uh, if people are interested in health and any side content that we bring up, feel free to contact me about that. Um, and now we're going to be getting right into the criticism that I have about Ron Paul's opposition of corruption. So, of course, this is about Ron Paul's opposition of corruption, but it's a criticism, not like a antagonistic criticism, but a thoughtful criticism. And we'll get into that in just a moment. All right, so I actually did not mention yet why I would have Dr. Carl Freestone as my kind of off-camera guest here um, in a Ron Paul related content. And I'm going to be talking about government, economy, a few related issues that people who are familiar with Ron Paul will know are issues that Ron Paul addresses. But Carl, do you want to say anything about your interest, familiarity in Ron Paul, and so anything in at this stage, or you want to just interrupt as we go, or a little of each?
I'll interrupt as you go. I don't really get involved in politics that much because I don't think it does any good.
Okay, speaking of depression or whatever, I don't know, right? um, all right, so but you have
But I do.
repeatedly made reference to Ron Paul and how of the various candidates, he's one of them. He is the most attractive to you, as far as I know,
Yeah.
by far,
Yes.
in fact.
Yes, by far.
Yeah, which is this. That's also true for me, at least. I agree with every um, compliment that Carl or most anyone else would give to Ron Paul. I agree with it. I supported Ron Paul starting around 1992. I'm not going to get off into that right now, but let's just like go through really some of the consequences of if Ron Paul's policies were to be implemented, and let's really consider how that would look. So Ron Paul opposes corruption. He threatens to end corruption and the political complexity of the military-industrial complex.
Good.
Okay, so Carl, your commitment is if you don't understand, I'm inviting you to make the commitment now. If you don't understand anything I say, or if it's a little fast, or if you think somebody else would have a question, you will interrupt me. Would you agree to that?
Yes.
Okay. Imagine the consequences of Ron Paul's policies being implemented in the U.S. He would decrease the size of federal government, ending foreign aid, reducing foreign military activity by the U.S., and slashing taxes to invite investment back into the U.S. from other countries. My acquaintance Carmen Alexa might complain that ending foreign aid and even reducing domestic welfare is not very compassionate. But that is exactly what Ron Paul advocates. Plus, think about all the money that could be leaving other countries to come to the U.S. for investment. How sad for them. That is obviously maybe with a little bad taste, but that is a joke. He's not. Ron Paul isn't advocating compassion. Uh, Though I think he would agree that a lot of the foreign aid, I mean, basically what he said about foreign aid is it doesn't go to help poor people in other countries. It goes to support dictators in poor countries and take from the taxpayers of the U.S. to advance certain very specific interests. Anyway, so obviously a president of the United States can't implement any of those policies alone. So just because he advocates all those things, it doesn't mean him being elected would automatically change anything. A constitutional amendment could make things different, or the support of the U.S. Congress could even legally force whoever was president towards any of those outcomes that Ron Paul advocates. It wouldn't require him being president. Congress could do it without him if two-thirds of Congress supported a certain thing, or if there was an amendment to the U.S. Constitution, those outcomes could be achieved through other ways. But many people support him in his presidential bid because they recognize that he would at least be a spokesman for a lot of those interests. So with the logistical realities in mind, meaning that him being elected doesn't in itself change any other policies, let's consider the actual consequences of those policies. At the same time, we'll be considering the actual consequences of current policies of increasing the influence of central governments, including the federal government in the U.S. As background, note that government is the influencing of behavior by force. Government is the influencing of behavior by force, particularly the systematic redistribution of affluence through organized coercion. In the case of foreign wars, it's quite clear that a government uses organized coercion to advance political and economic interests, with the bombs backing up the more seductive art of diplomatic relations and diplomatic negotiations. Clear?
Right.
Okay. So Ron Paul is basically advocating that the U.S. decrease its international and domestic operations of organized coercion, aka terrorism. I don't know if I'm allowed to say that. Anyway, for instance, consider the consequences of legalizing or decriminalizing marijuana. Huge numbers of jobs will be lost in the correctional system. Huge numbers of able-bodied people, mostly young men, will be available for employment. All of that could promote the capacity of those people to actually contribute some economic productivity that allows the U.S. to better compete with the rest of the world. Currently, all those correctional officers are just, warehousing and managing those prison populations, and the prison population, they're not, they're making a license plate here, they're not really contributing a lot necessarily. So you got all that? Mm-hmm. What about the protections and favoritisms of the current economic system? For instance, without the FDA promoting the interests of huge corporations at the expense of small farming operations, would small farmers recover the market strength they previously had in previous centuries and so on, and grow? Would the small farming as an industry grow? What if masses of people were not indoctrinated with propaganda for highly refined foods, especially carbohydrates and modern vegetable oils, and against healthy traditional foods of the last several thousand years or more? What if the USDA stopped raiding health food stores and farms? What would happen to the current health industry and food industry without all that protection and support and subsidy of the central government? Consider the huge losses financially for MDs when the far superior effectiveness of inexpensive methods are not suppressed. Consider the civil lawsuits that could bankrupt multitudes of MDs for promoting the use of interventions with clear records of harm and pathetic records of little or no benefit to the patient. But at least they are expensive and lucrative. Now, I didn't actually remember that I had written that when I invited Dr. Carl Freestone to be my little off-camera audience here. But given that you trained as a licensed medical professional and have some experience in what I was just referring to, what would you comment on as far as, do you see the central government as promoting certain ways of people dealing with their health and so forth? And take a minute or two if you want to comment on this one, because this is like right up your experience alley,
Right. When I say it's very stifling.
It is very stifling.
It, meaning government regulation of the healthcare industry, is very stifling. Licensing, all of that, stifling as far as personal license to explore other areas, because you're bound down to a different license. That's why I quit it.
That's why you quit operating under the license.
Yes,
you continue to do health.
Quit operating underneath the license.
Right. And for instance, this patch here, which we didn't talk about acupuncture or anything else, but it doesn't take a license to put a like putting a Band-Aid or a patch on your head, or having someone say, hey, here's where to put the Band-Aid or the patch or whatever. Now, obviously, this isn't a Band-Aid. I don't have a wound under here from a needle or otherwise. But
it's totally legal, though.
It's totally legal.
Not really touching you, but I'm getting a more dramatic result than manipulation.
I mean, spinal manipulation. He's a chiropractor.
Right.
So with the chiropractic license, you could do certain things Of course, other people without that license wouldn't be able to legally do those things, but you've given up that license and explored things that are even more effective in your experience.
Yes.
And I don't know if the licensure apparatus and central government and medical boards, I don't know if they prevent people from exploring other things, but they certainly influence markets and purchasing behavior and the actual ways that people eat and the kinds of medical interventions they seek and when they seek them and all that stuff. I mean, it's obvious that's what licensure boards are about. Is they promote certain things and they discourage certain things, and we're not saying that everything that they encourage is bad, or that everything they discourage is good. Just there are some things that are incredibly effective that aren't within the current system emphasized, that aren't emphasized within the current mainstream medical system. And I happen to look at that as I don't want to say the fault of government, but a circumstance that comes about along with central government. You wouldn't have the medical model you have now without the influence of central government.
That's right.
Okay, so Ron Paul is basically, Ron Paul is an MD.
Oh, that's right.
He's a gynecologist. He's delivered over 4,000 babies, is what I've been told. So anyway, as far as the MD, the MDs and the FDA, I wouldn't be surprised. I don't remember Ron Paul specifically saying anything about this, but I wouldn't be surprised if he's an advocate of holistic health and personal responsibility in health. Do you happen to know?
I don't know.
Yeah. So what about?
We had all of our babies at home. We never went to doctor.
Carl's the father of 12 children, all of his own children. What?
All home births. I delivered 4 of them.
And you delivered 4 of them. All right. As a chiropractor, did you have any training in delivering babies?
No.
No, you just found out how to do it, or had some midwives or something.
We had midwives there.
Yeah, that's cool. And they all went great, or not all of them?
They're all alive.
They're all alive. Okay, that's a good sign. I was thinking that somebody along the line of 12, some went smoother and some not as smooth, but anyway.
But there are heavy licensing laws regarding midwifery and stuff like that, and all of our midwives were not licensed.
And they all were great. You were very confident in them?
They were all great.
Yeah,
yes.
I also have a son, and he was not delivered in a hospital. We had, I don't think I guess because of licensure and certificate and all that stuff, I don't really know what her legal status was. I'm pretty sure there wasn't much legal status, and she was getting out of it because of concern about being pursued by the government. But we were very satisfied with her competence and the results. We actually had 2 people
to find out what his stand is on that.
What Ron Paul's stand is on that kind of things, yeah. Yeah, I mean, if he was to be opposed to homeschooling, I would find that incredibly surprising. I think he'd be very in favor of home birth, homeschooling, like all sorts of people want to do it, let them do it. That's pretty much, he's a libertarian in Republican party, whatever. Let's see. So consider the huge losses for many MDs if they're not competitive. If their main financial effectiveness is through insurance industry and central government preferences, then they'd have to compete with on an open market basis with all the other MDs and non-MDs and so on for actual results, the actual effectiveness of interventions or diets or whatever. So what if organizations like Fannie Mae and Ginnie Mae and FHA and HUD, all housing-related organizations, were discontinued or allowed to fail? Well, if not for the propping up of the mortgage industry, consider the suddenness of the massive decline in housing prices and rent prices. I'm sure housing prices may plummet anyway, but consider how fast the decline would be if all those federal government interventions, as in wealth redistribution programs, were quickly removed. So suddenly all of those federal programs were ceased. That would affect housing market immediately. So what if foreign wars were stopped totally? What would happen to all the businesses that rely on huge defense spending, like missile manufacturers and all the jobs related to that, from janitors to computer technicians to all the people who work at those plants. Well, what about all those soldiers and all the support personnel for those soldiers? What would they do? Have people really thought about, you're gonna actually take away a huge amount of economic activity if you're going to cut the federal government out of the equation or really reduce the federal government. It's a lot of the U.S. economy, including the U.S. economy abroad, in the sense of how much of the U.S. economic activity in Iraq or Afghanistan is directly related to military. There's some, of course, related to energy and oil and natural gas and so forth, but I assert that they're there along with the military, not as a coincidence. The military is there because the natural resources are there. Again, interrupt as you wish, Carl. So what Ron Paul is advocating in simplest terms is a withdrawal of the massive infrastructure of the military-industrial complex. Even mainstream healthcare would no longer be protected from open market competition. Massive food industries or really big agribusiness could collapse without protections and subsidies. The concentration of wealth in the hands of a few favored corporations would suddenly decentralize.
So is he a Keynesian economist?
Keynesian.
Keynesian,
No.
is that what it's called?
No, he is not. That
Not
Keynesian
like...
means that someone favors central government intervention to promote the economy of a particular country. What Ron Paul is saying is, let's reduce taxes, let's reduce government activity in the economy, and let the natural free market express itself or develop itself, innovate, compete, and let the U.S. come up to, if we're competing with China for manufacturing goods inexpensively, well, let the U.S. compete with China, for instance.
All right.
And that would also some people are concerned that would mean, we're going to have our labor laws and our environmental laws move towards China's. And that's a valid concern, but I don't know that it's realistic that the U.S. would have its environmental laws and child labor laws move towards China's. I think that the reality is that the U.S. middle class, when it is strong, would not have a big change in child labor laws, basically. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So let's see. The concentration of wealth in the hands of a few favored corporations would suddenly decentralize if Ron Paul's policies were implemented. How would that decentralizing happen? Real estate prices would collapse. That's the number one thing. Stock prices of major corporations would collapse. Really big
collapsed real estate prices.
Real estate prices in the U.S. are down dozens of percent in the last several years. By collapse, I mean down 80 to 95%.
Oh, all right.
In Phoenix, we're in Mesa, Arizona right now, which is part of the southeast part of the greater Phoenix Valley. And prices around here are down. I don't know if they're currently down 50%, but they fell a little more than 50% on average from 2005 to 2009 or 10. And I think they've actually come up a little bit since then. Does that sound right?
Yeah.
Or you don't know? I haven't tracked it as closely lately. When the decline was first starting in 2005, and prior to that, I was really closely watching. So when it first manifested in Phoenix, I said, "There it is. That's the beginning of the U.S. The U.S.'s participation in the global real estate shift that started in Japan in '89 and went to Europe prior to it arriving in the U.S. And Phoenix and Las Vegas and so on." So relating to a shift in global lending practices. That's the subject of other videos. So that's how the centralization of wealth would decentralize, as all of those, big corporations like Walmart, for instance. I don't mean to pick on Walmart, but they own a huge amount of land, and they own lots of buildings. And if the value of those lands in that building were to drop 80%, well, that means other portions of the world and of the U.S. Population would potentially, have a more equitable distribution of economic affluence. Okay, so the favoritism that the military-industrial complex currently provides, Ron Paul would end it if you could, or would at least reduce it. And that shows up in lots of prices of lots of corporations, as well as even things like real estate prices. So the relative value of human labor might rocket, even though wages might fall steeply, they might not fall as much. Human labor might rocket in practical value over owning a huge amount of land or owning stock in a corporation. This is something I'd actually never really thought about much until I wrote this piece this morning. So do you get that all this capital of resources has a huge amount of, people want to speculate in real estate. They want to speculate in stocks. They don't want to develop necessarily their own skills or be productive themselves. They, like me, in trading and
So
trading
education would go up.
contracts, in brokerage contracts. I'm doing trading. There's nothing really productive about that. That's a speculative thing. So it may be that people would be more interested in education, in job
themselves.
training, developing themselves, and applying their own, working with other people too, to organize new small businesses and small organizations and actually do, stuff with their time differently rather than be concerned about, is the government going to save my real estate investment? Can we have some new politician who's going to make my stock market investments be worthwhile? Well, people may sell investments, sell real estate, and be more attentive to their relationships with other people and their own productivity and their own use of their own time. So if human labor rose toward being a primary economic variable rather than the primary economic value being concentrations of hoarded resources and exclusive legal ownership, then there would be less inequality, less variation in affluence and influence. Hoarding private wealth is the American dream. Speculating for unearned gains is the American way, especially when it involves borrowed funds for mortgages. What Ron Paul is advocating is having to work to earn money. And that's a pretty big issue. What? That's a good thing, says Carl. And again, for those of us who think of ourselves as having tremendous skill and tremendous effectiveness, we're like, bring it on. Other people might be like, they want to maintain the productions that they currently have, right? And it's understandable, but anyway, it's maybe not sustainable. So what Ron Paul is advocating, and this is me paraphrasing him, of course, is that people would have to work to earn money, that their savings, their speculative investments, they wouldn't get rich off of flipping real estate. They'd have to actually earn money through economic productivity. Now, this is a criticism. I will get more to that in a bit. So just because all this stuff, you might be saying, oh, that's really great that he thinks that way. And JR agrees with him and Carl agrees with him. Well, I'm not done. Think of all the real estate flippers who retired early and who may have to get jobs again rather than live a privileged life of luxury as they pay meager wages for maids, public school nannies, and other domestic servants like landscaping crews and repair workers to fix their plumbing and their roof and all that. They'd have to actually go out and stop being, landlords that are rich. They'd have to get jobs, that kind of thing, and do labor themselves. What if all that diminished, and instead of valuing things like diamonds and massive estates so much, people value their relationships more and their stuff less? What if people valued other people in general more, rather than other people in particular, like the well-connected politician or the wealthy draconian boss, specific people? What would happen, or a judge or the president or whatever? What would happen to the death penalty if people, valued their relationships more? What would happen to the correctional system? What would happen to the global imperialist colonizing operations of organized coercion, like the U.S. military, and so on? What about the tax system? What would all those bureaucrats and tax lawyers do if a simple tax system replaced the current system of complexity?
Cool.
That'd be cool, says Carl. Maybe not for the tax lawyers and the bureaucrats. They'd have to get real jobs. Uh-oh.
They're more like parasites.
Carl says they're more like parasites. Well, yes, and
they
other
provide a service.
And they provide a service. And other content of mine, I've said, good things about parasites. They, in trees, in ecology and zoology, if there weren't for parasites, let's put it this way: parasites thin out weak portions of a population. And so there is a functionality to parasites. It's not, parasites aren't in, you know, they're not on the earth by a mistake of God. You know, parasites have a role to play, or they wouldn't be here. So do tax lawyers and you know, so on. So Ron Paul advocates simplifying complex systems of corruption and favoritism. That doesn't mean that corruption and favoritism would end, but he would simplify complex systems of corruption and favoritism. You understand what I mean by that, basically?
Yeah.
So he advocates.
In other words, it would just shift to a simpler way.
Yes, but well, I'm also going to get to, I think it would decentralize corruption.
Because you're never going to get rid of that.
Would you ever get rid of corruption? That's the kind of question that I'm raising. So I'm glad that you're getting it. So Ron Paul advocates.
It's not the government's place to get rid of corruption.
Okay. Carl said it. I didn't have to.
Oh, okay.
Well, I don't know. I mean, isn't it our responsibility?
The church and religion's place to get rid of corruption.
Well, he presents that, you know, to get rid of corruption. I'm saying you can't really get rid of corruption, but you can distinguish it, and government can punish it. Churches can discourage it. I mean, it's not like somebody has a monopoly on dealing with corruption. You and I, as parents, or as, you know, as business operators, like, corruption is just an issue. And by corruption, you know, we haven't really defined what I mean by corruption. Later on in this, I do. I already told Carl what I said. I'll just jump ahead. Corruption is being subject to influence by offers of money. That's basically what I said.
Right.
I said it in a little bit more general way than money, but yeah, like bribes.
Yeah, sounds like Isaiah chapter 1.
Like lobbying could be construed as a type of corruption. Government could be construed as a type of corruption with the organized coercion. Carl mentions Isaiah. Would you be
1
more specific? Like, I don't know the phrase.
Well, it talks about government officials being bought by bribes.
So it's not a new thing. That's what I thought when you say that.
No.
Isaiah is a few thousand years old. Bribery didn't get developed, you know, in the Obama administration or 20th century. Why is it corruption for government officials to be?
Why do you call that corruption?
That's just the word corruption. What it means is if a government official is influenced by bribes or offers of money, that's what corruption is.
Got it.
I mean, there's other types of corruption, but I'm calling it, like, for simplicity.
If they can be bought, that's corruption.
Yes, but also I'm going to make references to the media later and to regular people like you and I. Do we respond to offers of money? If somebody says, "Hey, I'll pay you,"
prostitution.
Great. What about prostitution? If somebody says to me, "I'll pay you $70 for, you know, a nude photo shoot, but I'll pay you $700 for, you know, some sexual act, or I'll pay you $7,000 if you'll be filmed to do that sexual act, then you're a star," you know, whatever. Well, that's corruption. And actually, we get into you know, this would be a big aside, but Carl and I have talked about
Why would that be corruption?
Sin and stuff. Well, what's the boundary of corruption? That's the question I'm pointing to.
Well, I thought we were talking about government officials.
We are, and I'm saying I've worked as a bureaucrat for government, as a public school teacher, and what else, in the correctional system back in the 90s in Florida. And corruption is all over the place. You have corruption in the schoolyard, amongst the children themselves. You know, if we want to say corruption, we can. But basically, where you have power, you have corruption. People say things like absolute power corrupts. Well, power is a context where it's like if you have a bully on the schoolyard, there's the lunch money thing. I'm going to take lunch money from them. Or the bully comes around and says, "Hey, would you like to buy, you know, Girl Scout cookies from my sister? If you don't, I'm not going to like you as much. And if you do, I'm going to protect you," or whatever. But, you know, it's like there's subtle and overt corruption all over human interaction.
Okay, so Ron Paul is saying he will end corruption in government, which basically means getting rid of bribes.
That's what I said. I don't know if he may have said that, but I'm taking a Ron Paul position and paraphrasing it and using it as something to criticize. I know a lot of what I'm saying is an accurate representation of his policies, but I don't know if he said corruption is bribery, we need to end bribery. I don't think he's really talking about bribery per se. He's talking about fraud, the Federal Reserve System, He's not talking about bribery specifically, but he does talk about the corporate influence on media. I assume. I'm not really that sure, but I think he talks about corporate influence on media, corporate influence on government a lot, like the corporate influence of pharmaceutical companies on the FDA or something. I'm pretty sure that Ron Paul makes reference to those issues. I don't follow him that closely anymore, so I'm not certain. Okay, um, so so I was saying, what would happen to the tax system? You know, all those lawyers and bureaucrats would have to get jobs. Ron Paul is advocating simplifying complex systems of corruption and coercion and favoritism. He advocates an ending of or dramatic reduction of the massive system of coercive wealth redistribution, which is the U.S. central government. The tax from these people, you give it to those people, those corporations, those disabled people, those farmers, those whatever, those farming companies. Take from a very large group of people, give to relatively small groups of people. That's what governments do. Okay?
Okay. Robin Hood type stuff.
No, governments take from the masses to give to just a few.
Oh, it's the opposite then.
Yeah.
Okay.
So what about his relationship with the media? Ron Paul would be a threat to the media. He would reduce the influence of mainstream media. How? Well, what if the media did not have the commercial revenues from the massive corporate interests of the military-industrial complex? What if there were a sudden increase in local media, social media like online, and actual live interaction in person between people, while the trend towards bigger and bigger audiences for a more and more homogenous central apparatus of mind control, propaganda, indoctrination diminished? Did you get that? Okay, so that's the kind of thing. If you take away all that central government favoritism of big business, well, the media is the media is the whore of those big business interests. So why would the media, be fair towards Ron Paul? He's a major threat to their
prostitution again, saying they're the whore.
He's a threat to their the base of their business, the advertising interests that support and organize mass media. And yeah, I call them a whore, but I don't, no disrespect to whores. All right. I mean, honestly, as far as whores and prostitution's concerned, I wouldn't be surprised if Ron Paul basically said, "Hey, if two people consent, that's none of my business. I don't, or leave that to the state." I don't think he has a big moral. He's generally a social. I don't know if I'd say social conservative. What do you call it? He's socially like, I'm not that interested in, whether gays marry or not. I don't really care. Do people, pay for sex or get it for free? I don't really care. What's their position on abortion? Well, I think he's generally pro-life, but he's pro-life probably in a way where he's like, pro-life on an individual choice basis, not on a, he might be pro-choice at the same time as he would say, well, I'm, in favor of health and I don't like the ideas of governments providing abortions to people. I think Ron Paul would say government shouldn't pay for people to have abortions in general. Maybe in specific cases, but anyway, he's just like, what's it called, laissez-faire. So he doesn't want government involved in a lot of cultural and social issues. He wants government to provide basic secure borders, secure currency, court systems that are reliable, that are not too susceptible to corruption.
Basically,
constitutional government.
Protect life, liberty, and property, that type of stuff.
Right. And I get into eventually property rights are a construct. So protect property rights. Ultimately, there's these ideas may not be that sound. So I was commenting on. I'll get back to that. I was commenting on mainstream media. So if there's a decentralization of the attention on mainstream media, masses of people might start to think for themselves. Masses of people might start obsessing, might stop obsessing about the U.S. economy and the U.S. Constitution and be more interested in things like their own budgets, their own neighborhood, their local community, and practical issues like physiology and health and diet and how to sew or how to garden or how to repair your own, roof. Instead of some professions and industries being protected and subsidized by the central government, the market would be free for open competition. The variations in the incomes of various professions could decline. Specialization of labor could decline, meaning that more people would be more trained in a wider variety of things. It could happen. The near dictatorship of central government bureaucracy and corporate concentrations of wealth could decline or even collapse, including as it relates to the media. So Ron Paul threatens to end corruption, or at least reduce centralized corruption. Rather than a centralized monopoly of corruption, corruption might decentralize as well. Rather than lobbyists being able to focus on centralized bureaucracies and buying off a few Supreme Court judges or whatever, instead, the legalized bribery and PR schemes would be less concentrated and also less distinctive, or less scandalous and less obvious once they're found. They wouldn't be as big. There would be a bunch of small decentralized corruptions. So the repression of small-scale corruption by central governments intent on monopolizing corruption would diminish. You getting all this?
Yeah.
The naive would no longer be as protected, and the clever would no longer be as thwarted. Of course, if clever people also did not face as many taxes to punish productivity, then technological innovation might also flourish. Instead of being corrupt, clever people might simply be productive and competitive. Suppression of alternative technologies, whether it's in fuel or medicine or computers, could collapse. So to whatever extent there's suppression of alternative technologies, if the government isn't there to really suppress every little person, then alternative technologies might flourish. Uniformity would decline. Instead of a handful of major auto manufacturers relying on sexy commercials during the Super Bowl, imagine 300 regional auto manufacturing franchises competing based on actual performance, price, and the performance of their vehicles, the safety, the fuel efficiency, so on. Again, advertising budgets for national TV networks might collapse, and not just during Super Bowls. Word of mouth might be a driving force behind market growth. We're talking about a decentralizing of the economy in the U.S. and really beyond, but we'll stay with the U.S. for now. Instead of the concentrated huge profit margins from people paying for name brand fashion, imagine people buying clothes based on features such as comfort and functionality, not the label. The entire market for high-heeled shoes might crash. Medical systems based on the suppressing of the immune system, combating symptoms, might crash as well. Or people may be so desperate that they continue to favor suppressive medications and moderate levels of short-term functionality, personal physiological functionality, so as to avoid a day or even a week of unplanned interruption to their regular schedule, like to earn money. Again, TV advertising budgets for pharmaceutical miracles are at issue here. You think about when I used to watch a lot of TV, there were a lot of pharmaceutical commercials on TV. It's like a huge portion of evening advertising is pharmaceutical commercials. A lot of your antacid commercials are at dinner time because people are eating poor foods and bad combinations, and encouraged to do so by by the they have the ad for the grocery store and the pizza delivery and then the antacid. They all go together. So further, as all those profit margins fall for suppressive medications, then their manufacture might decrease, their commercial advertising influence might decrease. The masses may simply be forced to turn to nutrition and wellness rather than immune system suppressants and mass-produced addictions like cigarettes and beer. Imagine if people targeted increasing their overall health rather than targeting occasional numbness to relieve them from their sensation of biochemical toxicity or deficiency. Are you you're keeping with my pace there? Well, the reality is that we can only speculate as to what would happen if Ron Paul's proposals were implemented. It might even open the door to an influx of international corruption on the scale of a new macrocosm of centralization and corruption with NATO or the UN or the BIS. Why do the masses have such favorable views of the UN? Mostly because the UN is so... Well, what do you say before I give the answer that you haven't heard yet? Why do you think so many people have such favorable views of the UN?
They're brainwashed.
Okay, that's the short answer that fits exactly what I was going to say, but what about the UN is so good?
I don't see... Well...
even if you don't agree with it, what do people think?
Keep a level of control. So,
and what is the spin that would have you or the average person think, oh, the UN being in more control is good?
Well, I don't think it's good.
Okay, I understand you
But
don't, but
there's a certain order that's present.
so people may be attracted to
To the
predictability.
In other words, it's a centralized order, and if it were taken away, chaos would reign because people are not used to ordering themselves.
And that's precisely the analogy that I'm pointing to as in regard to a decentralizing of the central government in the U.S. It's basically the same issue. Again, it's just a different level of issue, but it's the same issue.
Yeah.
So with the UN, I say the masses have favorable views of the UN because, Carl says brainwashing. I said mostly because the UN is so remote from the actual experience of the masses. Most people don't have any involvement with them. I know a few people who work for the UN, and I know a few people who've worked for the IRS. They're not bad people. They just they work for organizations that I may not favor in an open market circumstance, but the U.S. government doesn't ask for my consent. They just say, here's the sales tax rate. You're going to pay it at this store. That's how it's going to go. Or here's the income tax rate, and they attempt to collect it as best they can, preferably by me just sending them money, of course. Or my if I have a W-2 regular employee job, then they take out a percentage for Social Security and federal income tax withholding and all that kind of stuff, and it's relatively easy for the IRS to cash those checks or whatever they do. So why do the masses have such favorable views of the UN? Mostly because the UN is so remote from the actual experience of the masses, and the masses therefore know almost nothing about the UN. But there is a lot of reference to the UN. We'll get to that in a minute. Consider the vast majority of people have never even heard of the BIS. Do you even know what I mean by that? I've told you before, but you might have forgotten.
It's a bank of, what is it?
Bank of International Settlements, or Bank for International Settlements, and it's the central bank of central banks, so they're over the Federal Reserve Bank. You could say they're kind of the culmination of the organized empiracy, or the, I don't even know what to call it, organized piracy that rules the world, at least rules financial structures and so forth, and has, for however long. It's thousands of years old. The New World Order is nothing. There's nothing very new about it, except the particular methodologies and technological systems of it. But the fact that there's an elite, well, there's always been a top 1% or a top tenth of 1%. In birds, there's a top 1%. You can't get rid of half the people are above average. That's just mathematically how it goes. Yeah. You don't have any particular look on your face, Carl, so I wanted to give you a chance to digest what you said. Okay. So let's see. So a few well-constructed PR pieces, public relations pieces about the UN, and the masses may presume that the UN is unlike any other similar operation in history. Like that the UN's violence is less violent, or that their justice is more just, or that their courts are less political, or that their diplomatic negotiations are less diplomatic, which to me isn't necessarily a favorable word. Are you familiar with John Perkins? Okay, well, he made comments about the diplomacy of multinational corporations and governments as involving a whole lot of assassinations, or threats of assassination. If the centralizing of the influence of media was to decline, governments might have to resort to open activities rather than hiding behind propaganda and diversion tactics. That's why the media is so important to the modern military-industrial complex. Is the mainstream media really censoring Ron Paul? No, not at all. They're just focusing on other things instead. Because censoring Ron Paul may be a trivial issue, though. People who get worked up about what the media focuses on are obviously relying on the mainstream media to be responsible to them, rather than just investing in whatever forms of media and communication and so forth actually fulfill on one's own values. Got it?
I didn't get that.
Okay. So if I'm really concerned about the media and they're censoring Ron Paul, I'm acknowledging their influence, but I'm also saying that I am counting on, there's something like I'm counting on them to deliver relevant information to me. Mm-hmm. And there's a difference between I'm counting on them to deliver relevant information to me, and I notice they're not, and
relevant to you or
relevant
to the...
Well, I meant relevant to me. Okay. So things that fulfill all my values. If I'm interested in knowing, what's the future of the U.S. economy, I could turn on CNN, or I could read an article that Jim Shepard wrote in 2002 and have more insight about the U.S. economy today from a Jim Shepard article or a Robert Prechter article or one of my articles from the early 2000s than any, you go on to a TV program and they talk like it's all unpredictable. I think that's complete BS. I think it's easy to predict, given that I could list myself and many other people who predicted all the major surprises of the last several years in the U.S. and in many cases beyond the U.S. and EU and worldwide in many cases. So if we want to have relevant information about the future of our industry or of the economy, the mainstream media might not be a very reliable source for that. And so we realize at some point, they might not be a reliable source, and they're however reliable they are, maybe not at all, maybe they're misinformation, maybe they're, their simple function is to influence people's behavior in the fulfillment of corporate interests, like their advertisers' interests. That would make sense. If they're doing that, that is their job. I've worked in media too. That's the job of media. So who taught us that the media should be reliable, or that the media should be accurate, or that the media should serve the interests of the general audience? Every media outlet is a business designed to serve the interests of the operators and funders of the business. Imagine me complaining that a particular hardware store in Europe is not featuring the line of product that I personally think is the best to use. Why would I be concerned about that? Why would I obsess over it? Maybe I'm even the owner of that product line. I'm trying to get different stores to carry that line. But still, why focus on that store in particular? What if CNN doesn't run my story? Or what if a bunch of countries or a bunch of media outlets don't run my story? Does that stop me? Does that mean my product isn't as good? Well, why not just market to some other stores? If no stores are retailing my product line either, then I might sell it myself. I might not try and get them to carry it. I might just get my website or go to construction sites or whatever and go to homeowners and sell it. Or I might try developing a new product line. So these are the kind of things that I mean when I make reference to adaption. The receptivity of the mainstream media is whatever it is. It can change over time, but of course the mainstream media is biased. So am I. Why would the mainstream media give Ron Paul equal treatment? Equal treatment is not the job of the media. Promoting favoritism and influencing behavior is the job of the media. Are you okay with that? I mean, do you have a criticism of my construction of the language?
No.
Okay. So there are economic operations directed by commercial interests, and the media is amongst them. So including, of course, editorial decisions that are influenced by the advertisers funding commercials. So if the top 10 commercial advertisers of let's say I'm the Daily Show with Jon Stewart, and the top 10 commercial advertisers tell my Comedy Central media outlet that running a particular story or program, or not running a particular story or program, will result in discontinuing of advertising revenues. They're going to pull their funding in support of our program. Could that make a difference in whether the story or program gets run? Yes, it could. And public TV, with the Oppenheimer Foundation or the Ford Foundation or the Rockefeller Foundation, do they exert influence over the content of the programming? Probably. Why wouldn't they? I mean, it'd be ridiculous to assert that there's no influence, that there's no bias. Media is biased. Media is for biasing the public. That's their job. The media indoctrinates us about what should be and what should not be, what we should do and what we should not do, what we should think about and what we should not think about. That is their function. So I do not complain that a particular hardware store in Europe sells whatever they sell. No one told me to complain about that. No one told me to focus on it. If the media told me to complain about the hardware store, I might be outraged about it, but I don't care. I just, if I'm a producer or manufacturer or an inventor of some hardware item, then I just carry out my business. I promote it. It sells however well it sells. I develop new products that sell even better or whatever. In the U.S., the mainstream media has been trained to be attentive to the focus. The mainstream public in the U.S. has been trained to be attentive to the focus of the mainstream media, to be attentive to the controversies that the media publicizes, and even to be shocked that the media would ever be biased. We are trained to perceive the media as honorable and trustworthy and so on, and like that they shouldn't be biased. Again, we may know little about the UN or the BIS, but even with the mainstream media right in front of us, never having been unbiased, never in the history of mainstream media has there been an unbiased media. How much do we know about them? Do we recognize them, that they are biased and that that's their job, and that their job is to bias the public? They are subject to the influence of lobbying, as in, responding to their advertisers who fund their editorial choices, as in corruption, by way of influence through offers of rewards, through people saying, yes, we'll support your program, we'll buy your ads. So am I. I'm subject to the influence of lobbying and corruption. I work for pay. I do not work for the direct, immediate economic benefit to me of my own activity, except when I do. I do work, like at a job, to pay for the promise of, I work for pay or for the promise of future payment. If I work for a small business, or if I employ people, they have that kind of dynamic. And whether that job would be as a public bureaucrat or as a real estate salesperson, like a commission-earning realtor, or as a hitman, or as a prostitute, or as a film star, porn film star, or regular film star, a theater actor, what else have we made reference to here? As a politician, as a media, personality, as a healthcare provider.
Mm-hmm.
If I do it in the context of, anything besides immediate pay for my services, then that's complex. If I do it for immediate pay for my services, then that's the most simple and obvious form of corruption. We don't call it corruption, we call it working for pay. Now, if I'm a hitman or a prostitute or a soldier, that's breaking some law or breaking some expectation socially, then we're going to call it corruption. But who taught us what corruption is? The media, the government, whoever, I don't know, but someone did. Corruption, you can't identify corruption, in the behavior of wolves. You can't identify the corruption in the behavior of trees. Corruption is specifically, a category of human behavior. I don't know which behavior. Somebody has to define that. So maybe you are susceptible to believing that the mainstream media is really threatened by Ron Paul. Maybe they are. What about you? Are you threatened by the mainstream media? Like when they present certain information, or when a hardware store in Europe, carries a particular item, is that really a threat to me? Have we been trained to look for a political savior to protect us from the threats that we may have been trained to perceive? And my point is here, what about Ron Paul? Have we been trained to perceive certain threats and trained that Ron Paul would be the savior to protect us from those threats, or that kind of thing? Comment?
Well, I'm thinking, why would something be a threat? Something would be a threat because of an incompetency, right?
On the one hand, yes, I think I know what you're thinking.
Well, I'm thinking I'm a chiropractor up in Snowflake, and a new one moves into town.
Right.
That would be a threat to me.
It could be a threat if you had a concern about your credibility,
right,
and your competence, not credibility, your competence. That's the main thing. Yeah. And so yes, and then there's actual things like wars and
like
bombs and stuff like that. Those kind of threats. What?
If my integrity was lacking, then I would be threatened more.
If your integrity was lacking, yes, but also if you were a plumber that had lots of integrity but just weren't very skilled, and then another plumber who was much more skilled, it has to do with skill or competency. The effectiveness, how quickly can you produce valuable results? You as a chiropractor might be competitive on par with a dentist or an MD or something in terms of how effective your chiropractic results are, in terms of like how long they last for people. With chiropractic that sometimes you'd have to repeatedly see people, right? And one of the things about these patches, and we can do a little, promo for the patches now if you want. I don't care. It's fine with me. I never said I wasn't biased. Really. There is a certain amount of lasting effect. So whereas the needle with acupuncture, you have it in for a few minutes, and it's not that it doesn't last, but the length that these things last, given the cost of them, that's the issue, is like how much does it cost and how effective is it? It's a pretty good deal. That's all. And if you have a competent specialist such as Dr. Carl Freestone, and now I'm just going to do a naked pitch for you. If you're in Arizona, or if you want to contact them by phone, I don't know how much you can really do for somebody by phone, but you can certainly consult with them. But
do it by Skype.
Skype, okay. Like video phone, for those of you who don't know what Skype is. Basically, there's a lot of benefits that people can have with Skype, and with word of mouth, and with competent and effective results. I talked about in my video yesterday about the overnight recovery, the ability to walk. Things that work, people talk about. And if we are bombarded with media information and mainstream, federalized public school propaganda, from federal school programs where they all have the same textbooks and everybody's told the same stuff. When we have that uniformity, you don't have as much innovation, you don't have as much experimentation, you don't have as much vitality in a certain way. It also some people might say it's orderly, it's predictable, it's consistent, it's reliable. I'm not saying that there isn't a balance in there somewhere, but it's not hard for someone to turn off their TV and talk to people or share a YouTube video. I mean, Facebook and what are the other things? What is it called? I don't remember the name of the other thing that was before Facebook, but it's like Facebook. MySpace. MySpace and Facebook and Twitter and YouTube and so on. These are really serious technological and economic threats to the status quo. But by threat, I just mean something different. It's not mainstream media, newspapers, TV. They're going to be adapting to the internet. All right. So, what about you? Are you threatened by the mainstream media? Have you been trained to look to a political savior to protect you from the threats that you've been trained to perceive? Maybe corruption, which I previously defined as subject to influence by offers of money or other compensation. Maybe that is a pattern of human behavior that is in no way threatened by Ron Paul. He might decentralize corruption or not support the continuing of the massively centralized corruption of the central government of the U.S. currently, but maybe centralized concentrations of corruption will diminish, such as those of the mainstream media, and maybe particular policies will be a catalyst in those trends of decentralizing. But I think the decentralizing is happening. It's technological, it's economic, and of course political systems will look different as we have the shift from print to radio to TV to electronic medium of communication, texting and all that stuff. Of course, society will reorganize itself, and of course political systems will look different, and the conversations that people have will be different. More people might be parts of certain churches or certain organizations, certain educational institutions. And when I said that, I meant like universities, but it could also be something like landmark education. Certain institutions where there are opportunities for people to introspect, review the context, linguistically, the meaning that they associate with things, the interpretations that they have of things, and review the results they're getting and the performance alternatives that they have in terms of producing results in the future. Principle over politics is what Ron Paul's ad says. Okay, that's what it says. Consider that every politician says they're against corruption. However, do any of them ever explore any alleged differences between corruption and capitalism? Corruption is responding to the influence of offers of compensation. Capitalism is responding to the influence of offers of compensation. Carl, do you have an argument against what I just said? If you do, I want to hear it.
Say it again.
Corruption is responding to the influence of others' offers of compensation. Capitalism is responding to the influence of other people's offers of compensation. Okay. So imagine a politician or a mainstream media outlet that announces that it is the pro-corruption candidate or channel. That simply does not make sense, does it? All media outlets, unless Jon Stewart does it as a parody on The Daily Show or something, all media outlets and all politicians are influenced by whatever has influenced and will influence them. I do not complain that media outlets are biased, except if I ever do. I do not pretend that I am not biased, except if I ever do. I'm not biased at all, by the way. In conclusion, I might say that mainstream media should not be subject to the influence of offers of compensation. Likewise, politicians should not be subject to the influence of offers of compensation. Chiropractors and especially that guy over there, he should not be subject to the influence of offers of compensation, unless he should. I value direct rewards as well as indirect rewards, like being paid with money or, on what do you get, cash cards? You have a card that, people would deposit money onto that card and you get to use it to buy airplane tickets and grocery store purchases and gasoline. So that's indirect stuff. You're getting paid with money that you can use to buy other things. Why wouldn't everyone else, even politicians and other bureaucrats in the mainstream media, also value direct rewards as in indirect rewards. Why wouldn't everyone be subject to the influence of offers of compensation? Even Ron Paul. He might be a great guy to vote for. He might be a great guy. He might be a great doctor. All those things. But I don't get I oppose corruption as really being that interesting. So that's it. Do you have any closing comments? Okay. Thank you for your listening and interaction. And one of these days, maybe very soon, we're going to probably do a little like a demonstration video of some of Dr. Carl's Freestone's magical, miraculous results that he provides people. All right. Thanks for your interest. Feel free to comment on the YouTube video or wherever else, the blog and so forth.